the savanna has never been just a place where animals live. Since ancient times, these lands have held ancient secrets, a connection to the spirit world hidden from ordinary sight. And if we look closely at Scar's history, we will notice what escapes the casual observer: his rise to power, his dark charisma, his influence over the savanna. All of this has a mystical explanation. Scar made a deal with the ancient spirits of the savanna, sacrificing not only Mufasa, but also the balance of the entire. This is not just a theory, it is an explanation for all the oddities and inexplicable moments that Disney left for the most attentive viewers. What if the true nature of Scar's villainy is not just jealousy and ambition, but something much more sinister? We are used to perceiving the confrontation between Scar and Mufasa as a simple story of envy and betrayal. But what if there is an ancient mystical conflict behind it, rooted in the very foundations of African spirituality? Take a look at the scenes where Scar is in his cave. Notice the strange shadows on the walls, the bizarre patterns that are never explained in the film. These aren't just artistic choices. They are ritual symbols, marks of the otherworld. And what about Scar's green eyes? In African mythology, green eyes are associated with the ability to see spirits, with a special Look closely at the scene where Scar pushes Mufasa into the ravine. Have you ever noticed the unnatural glow in Scar's eyes at that moment? Or the strange, almost invisible mist that surrounds him as he utters his fateful words? These details are too small to notice at first glance, but the most shocking moment is the behavior of the animals around Scar. Even the hyenas, his closest allies, display a strange, almost ritualistic obedience that goes beyond normal animal behavior. They are not just his accomplices. They are conduits between worlds, intermediaries in his deal with the spirits of the savanna. Remember the moment in the film when Scar utters the phrase, "I am surrounded by idiots." This is not just a boastful statement. If you listen to his intonation and notice his micro-expressions, you can see that he is not only addressing the hyenas. He is conversing with someone else that others cannot see. Researchers of African culture and mythology note the special role of the figure of the traitor shaman, someone who turns away from the natural order for personal power. In folktales, such a character always makes a deal with the dark spirits of the savanna, gaining power over the elements but a deal with spirits always comes at a price, and the consequences of such a deal affect not only the one who made it, but also everything living around them. The drought, famine, and destruction that came to the Pride's lands during Shram's reign are classic signs of a broken mystical balance, described in dozens of African legends. What if Shram's story is the story of a man so hungry for power that he broke the most ancient law of the savanna? The law that forbids seeking power beyond the natural circle of life? If you look closely at Shram's cave, you will notice strange drawings on the walls. They are easy to mistake for ordinary cracks or features of the rock, but upon closer inspection, they form ancient symbols very similar to those used in African rituals to summon ancestral spirits. Only in Shram's case, these are not benevolent ancestral spirits. The most intriguing evidence is Shrama's behavior after he becomes king. He doesn't just relax and enjoy his power. He performs strange rituals while alone. Remember the episode where he sifts through bones in his cave? Disney animators claim that he is just playing with a mouse. But if you slow down the frame and look closely, it's not a game. It's a ritual arrangement of bones, an ancient way of communicating with spirits in South Africa. The song Be Prepared itself is not just a villainous musical performance. It's a disguised mystical hymn, a call to the spirits of the savanna to join his plan. Pay attention to the structure of the song, to the strange musical motifs that are not found anywhere else in the Lion King soundtrack. Musicologists note similarities with the ritual chants of the peoples of East Africa. And most importantly, there is the moment when lightning strikes behind Scar as he climbs the Pride Rock. This is not just a dramatic special effect. It is a sign of his alliance with otherworldly forces, with the dark side of the spirit world. In African mythology, lightning is the most obvious manifestation of the spirit's To fully understand the scale of this mystical deal and its impact on the entire plot of The Lion King, we need to delve deeper into Scar's backstory, into what led him to this fateful decision. After all, making a deal with the dark spirits of the savanna is not a spontaneous decision. It is a long journey that requires special knowledge, rituals, and, most importantly, a willingness to pay a terrible price. What price did Scar pay? What promises did he make to the dark spirits? And why did they ultimately turn their backs on him? To answer these questions, we need to look at the canonical events from a completely new mystical perspective. And we should start from the moment when the young lion, who did not yet bear the name Scar, received his famous mark. In the canonical story of The Lion King, Scar appears before us as Mufasa's younger brother, deprived of attention and power. Always second, always in the shadows, always the spare heir. But what is truly remarkable is not so much his place in the royal hierarchy as his inexplicable knowledge and strange abilities, which manifest themselves throughout the story. Before he became Scar, he was called Taka, and here lies the first mystical connection. In some African dialects, Taka means earth or dirt, an element traditionally associated with the underworld and ancestral spirits. This is the first hint of his predisposition to communicate with otherworldly forces. Consider the contrast between Mufasa and Taka from a spiritual perspective. Mufasa is always associated with the sky, the sun, and daylight. His mane is the color of the sun, and his name sounds majestic and open. Scar, on the other hand, is always in the shadows, prefers dark caves, and is surrounded by darkness and twilight. This is not just a character trait, it is a reflection of his spiritual essence, his connection to another. But the key moment is when Taka gets his famous scar. In the canonical version, it is either the result of a buffalo attack, according to the book The Tale of Two Brothers, or the result of a conflict with other lions. However, these explanations leave too many questions unanswered. The scar is located above the eye, in a place that in African spiritual practices is considered the third eye, the point of contact with the spirit world. What if this wound is not accidental? What if it is the result of an initiation ritual, a voluntary sacrifice made to establish first contact? Pay attention to Taki's behavior after receiving the scar. He doesn't just change his name, he changes himself. He becomes quieter, more mysterious, and acquires a strange power over hyenas, which are traditionally considered in African mythology to be conduits between the worlds. The most striking evidence of the mystical nature of the scar is the scene where young Simba asks his uncle about it. Scar responds evasively, speaking almost reverently about his mark. This is not shame for a physical defect. It is respect for the symbol of his spiritual rebirth. In African traditions, facial scarring is a common element of shaman initiation rituals, especially for those who specialize in communicating with dangerous spirits. Such scars not only mark the initiate, but also serve as a channel for communication. Another intriguing aspect is Scar's inexplicable knowledge of ancient rituals and legends. In the scene where he talks to Simba before sending him to the gorge, he mentions a surprise his father has in store for him. How could he have known about the traditional royal rite of initiation for the heir? There is no indication in the canon that Mufasa shared such plans with his brother. The most mysterious aspect remains Scar's strange connection to the graveyard of the elephants. According to African beliefs, places where the remains of great animals are gathered have a special mystical power. They are portals between worlds. And it is there, at the graveyard of the elephants, that Scar first encounters the hyenas, creatures who will become his intermediaries in communicating with the spirits. It is noteworthy that the hyenas follow Scar with almost religious zeal, despite his obvious contempt for them. This is not just a relationship between master and servants. It is a relationship between a priest and ritual assistants. The hyenas do not simply help Scar, they fulfill their part of a mystical contract. A careful analysis of the color symbolism associated with Scar confirms our theory. His black mane is a color associated in African mythology with the spirit world. His green eyes are a sign of double vision, the ability to see both the world of the living and the world of spirits at the same time. Even his thinness and angularity contrast with Mufasa's powerful physique, emphasizing his belonging to a different, non-physical. But the most obvious proof of Scar's connection to mystical forces is the inexplicable behavior of animals in his presence. Even when he does not yet have formal power, small animals freeze when he approaches, and birds stop singing. This is a classic sign of the presence of the Marked One, someone who bears the mark of the otherworld. In scenes where Shram is alone, we notice his strange monologues, as if addressed to someone invisible. Traditionally, this is perceived as a dramatic device, but what if he really is communicating with someone? With the dark spirits of the savannah who have become his secret allies. Particularly telling is the scene in Scar's cave, where he examines the skull of a small animal. At first glance, this is simply a demonstration of his cruelty. But on closer inspection, his movements are too methodical, too ritualistic. This is not idle entertainment. It is a form of divination, a way of obtaining information from the... Let's return to the moment when Scar received his scar. In African mythology, there is a belief that spirits can mark the chosen one through a wound inflicted by an animal mediator. Such an animal does not act of its own free will, but as an instrument of higher powers. If the buffalo really did wound Taka, as the book claims, then wasn't it just a tool in the hands of... After receiving the scar, Taka does not simply take a new name. He stops appearing in open spaces of the savanna during the day, preferring the shadows, twilight, and the border between light and darkness. This is typical behavior for someone who has made a pact with the forces of twilight. He himself becomes a borderline creature, neither fully belonging to the world of the living nor completely gone to the world of spirit. Researchers of Disney's work point to strange audio effects accompanying the appearance of Scar. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper, rustling, low vibrations, sounds traditionally associated in African culture with the presence of spirits. They are not part of the dialogue or musical accompaniment, but are specifically sound effects designed to create... Animals instinctively sense Scar's connection to another world. Notice how even large predators tense up in his presence. This is not just fear of physical danger. It is an instinctive sense of a disturbed order, the presence of something alien to the natural circle of life. But if Scar really did make a deal with the spirits of the savannah, what exactly was that deal? What were its terms, and what did he promise the dark forces in exchange for power? The answers to these questions lie in a careful analysis of key scenes in the film where Scar demonstrates his unnatural power and knowledge. The essence of Scar's deal with the spirits of the savannah becomes clear if you look closely at a few key scenes in The Lion King. What did he offer the otherworldly forces, and what did he get in return? The answer lies at the heart of African mystical tradition. At the heart of the deal is the violation of the circle of life, the sacred order that maintains balance in the savannah. In African spiritual practices, there is the concept of an upside-down world, a state where the natural hierarchy is disrupted, where the weak become strong and the lowly take the place of the high. This is exactly what Scar offered the spirits. To overturn the natural order, destroy harmony, and create a world where the laws of nature are distorted. In return, he received not just physical strength or power, he gained the ability to manipulate other beings on an almost hypnotic level. Remember how easily he manipulates Simba in the scene in the gorge, how his words work flawlessly on the gullible lion cub. This is not just cunning. It is a mystical power of suggestion given. Visual evidence of this deal is scattered throughout the film. The most striking example is the famous song, Be Prepared. At first glance, it's just a villainous musical number, but upon closer inspection, we see all the elements of a classic spirit summoning ritual. Green geysers of flame. In African mythology, green fire is associated with the presence of spirits. Hyena marching in a trance, a classic image of ritual ecstasy. Scar's elevation on the rock, a traditional pose of a shaman mediator between worlds. Strange symbols, projections of skulls and hyenas on the walls, ancient mystical signs. But the most disturbing element is the cascade of bones at the end of the song. This is not just a dark aesthetic, it is part of the ritual. In the traditions of many African tribes, the bones of ancestors were used to communicate with spirits, and the specific arrangement of the bones was considered a way to encode messages to otherworldly forces. The lyrics of the song are particularly telling. I'm talking about a change of power, a new order. These are not just political statements. They are direct references to the disruption of the natural flow of the circle of life, a key element of the pact with the dark spirits. Now about the price of the deal. What did Scar give up for this power? In African mythology, the payment to the spirits always includes three elements: blood, soul, and legacy. Blood was given at the moment of Mufasa's death. It is no coincidence that Scar himself utters the phrase, "Long live the king," before pushing his brother into the ravine. This is not just a mockery. It is a ritual formula confirming the sacrifice. Scar's soul was given gradually, which explains his transformation throughout the film. At the beginning, we see a sarcastic but still rational character. By the end of his reign, he becomes paranoid, obsessed, and talks to himself. Classic signs that his soul no longer belongs entirely to... The legacy is the most interesting part of the payment. Scar promised the spirits of the savannah that the pride's lands would become a place of chaos, where the order would be turned upside down and become the new norm. This explains why he allowed the hyenas to hunt without restrictions, and why he took no action during the drought. This wasn't just bad management, it was fulfilling The role of the hyenas in this deal deserves special attention. In the movie, they're portrayed as Scar's simple henchmen, but in the context of our theory, their function is much deeper. In African mythology, hyenas are considered border creatures, inhabiting the world between the living and the dead. Their ability to feed on carrion symbolically connects them to the cycle. Scar did not use hyenas simply as an army. They were his mediums, conduits for his will in the spirit world. Note that all of Scar's key plans are carried out through the hyenas. They lure Simba into the gorge, they attack the pride, they support his reign. This is not simply delegation. It is the use of their mystical qualities as conduits. The scene where Scar communicates with the hyenas at the graveyard of the elephants is particularly telling. We are used to thinking of this place as simply dangerous territory, but in the context of African mythology, it is a sacred space where the line between worlds is at its thinnest. It is there that the agreement between Scar and the spirits could have been made or renewed. Note Scar's strange behavior during the drought. He makes no attempt to improve the situation, even though he clearly has enough intelligence to come up with solutions. This is not simply apathy or incompetence. It is compliance with the terms of the deal. The depleted, dying land of the pride was an offering to the spirits, promised chaos and the destruction of the natural order. The most convincing evidence of the mystical nature of Shram's power is his strange behavior after his ascension. His physical condition deteriorates, although it would be logical to expect the opposite. After all, he is now king and has access to the best food and water. This is a classic sign that the spirits are taking their toll, gradually draining the life force of the one who made the deal with them. The key point of our theory is Shere Khan's inability to personally eliminate Simba. Have you ever wondered why Scar, an adult lion, did not kill the defenseless lion cub himself? Why did he entrust this task to the hyenas? In the context of a mystical deal, this makes sense. Scar could not harm Mufasa's direct heir with his own paws. That would have violated the terms of the agreement. The spirits allowed him to remove Mufasa as an obstacle, but demanded that the heir's blood not be on his paws directly. Another strange behavior of Scar is his refusal to mate with the lionesses of the pride after seizing power. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is absurd. A dominant male should seek to spread his genes. But if we look at it through the prism of a mystical deal, everything falls into place. Scar promised the spirits to break the line of the pride's legitimate rulers, and the birth of his own heirs would have... Analyzing the final battle between Scar and Simba, we see further confirmation of our theory. Notice how Scar's behavior changes when lightning strikes the ground, causing a fire. He becomes more aggressive, more powerful, almost supernaturally agile for his exhausted state. This is not just adrenaline, it is the last burst of strength given to him. But in the end, the spirits turn away from Scar. Why? Because he broke the unspoken condition of the agreement. He was supposed to maintain chaos, the inverted order, but not allow the complete destruction of the pride's lands. The spirits needed a world on the brink, balancing between life and death, not a completely dead land. When drought and famine reached a critical point, the spirits considered the agreement broken and refused to support. The most intriguing aspect of our theory is that it explains the incredibly rapid recovery of the pride's lands after Simba's ascension. From an ecological point of view, such changes would have taken years, if not decades. But if we consider this as the destruction of a mystical agreement and the return of the natural order, the instantaneous... However, there is another figure in this story who understood the true nature of what was happening. A figure whose strange actions and rituals take on new meaning in light of our theory. We are talking about Rafiki, the shaman and guardian of the spiritual traditions of the savannah. Throughout The Lion King, Rafiki is portrayed as a wise, somewhat eccentric shaman, a keeper of traditions who performs ceremonies and gives advice. But in light of our theory, his role takes on a completely different, much more significant dimension. Rafiki was the only one who knew from the beginning about Scar's deal with the spirits of the savannah and acted. We see the first hint of his awareness in the ceremony introducing Simba. Notice the strange symbols that Rafiki draws on the lion cub's forehead. These are not just decorative marks. They are protective symbols found in the rituals of many African peoples, designed to shield the child from the influence of evil spirits. Rafiki is literally performing a protective ritual, knowing that Simba is threatened not only by physical danger from Scar, but also by a mystical threat. Rafiki's home, the baobab tree, also takes on new meaning. In African traditions, the baobab tree is considered the tree of shamans, a place where the spiritual power of the earth is most concentrated. Rafiki did not choose this place by chance. He created a spiritual bastion to counter the dark force that Scar brought to the pride's lands. Check out the weird drawings in Rafiki's house. We're used to seeing them as historical chronicles or the royal family tree. But if you look closely, you'll notice symbols similar to those used in African protective amulets. Rafiki wasn't just recording history, he was creating a mystical shield to protect the rightful line of the Pride's rulers from the interference of dark. The most telling example is Rafiki's behavior during Scar's reign. Notice that he does not leave the Pride's land, even though most of the animals leave in search of a better life. This is not just loyalty to his home, it is a strategic decision. Rafiki stays to continue his rituals of resistance, preventing the dark spirits from completely taking over the Pride's land. Rafiki's strange songs and dances, which are presented in the film as manifestations of his eccentricity, are actually complex shamanic rituals. Pay attention to his gestures. They are remarkably similar to the movements of Maasai shamans during ceremonies to expel evil spirits. Rafiki's staff is another important detail. We are used to thinking of it as a simple walking stick or ritual object. But in the traditions of African shamans, such a staff, decorated with fruits, is a powerful tool for communicating with benevolent ancestral spirits. Every movement of this staff in the film is not just a gesture, but part of Rafiki's ongoing dialogue with the good spirits of the savannah who oppose those summoned by Scar. But the most striking proof of our theory is the scene where Rafiki discovers that Simba is alive. Pay attention to his actions. He doesn't just rejoice or rush to find the lion cub. He performs a complex ritual with paints, makes hand gestures, and utters specific sounds. This is not just an expression of emotion. It is a ritual of destroying part of Scar's agreement with the spirits. At this moment, a key turning point occurs. Rafiki destroys the condition of the agreement that would have ended Mufasa's line. By discovering the living heir and performing the ritual, he creates a mystical breach in Scar's deal, setting in motion a process that will ultimately lead to the restoration of the natural order. The scene in the jungle when Rafiki first meets the grown-up Simba is particularly telling. His strange behavior, songs, and headbutts are not just a way to provoke Simba or make him follow him. It is a complex cleansing ritual designed to free Simba from the residual influence of the dark force that, through Scar, continued to affect the heir to the Pride even from Rafiki's phrase, "It's not who you are, it's what you can become," takes on new meaning. This is not just philosophical advice. It is a direct counteraction to Scar's manipulations and the influence of dark spirits. Rafiki is literally fighting for Simba's soul, striving to return him to his true spiritual essence, untouched by the dark path. The most mystically charged scene is when Rafiki shows Simba Mufasa's reflection in the water. We are used to interpreting this as a metaphor or psychological device. But in the context of our theory, it is a literal manifestation of Rafiki's shamanic power. His ability to open a channel between the world of the living and the world of spirits, revealing the true nature of things. Pay attention to the symbols Rafiki draws in the air before Mufasa's reflection appears. These gestures are remarkably similar to the ritual movements of Yoruba shamans when summoning ancestral spirits. Rafiki is not just showing Simba a metaphor, he is literally opening a portal that allows Mufasa's spirit to speak to his son. The scene with Mufasa's spirit appearing in the sky is the climax of this spiritual battle between Rafiki and the dark forces. It's not just an inspiring vision, it's the spirit world directly interfering, channeled through Rafiki's shamanic powers. Here we see the moment when Scar's pact is finally broken. The benevolent spirits of the savannah, summoned by Rafiki, directly intervene in the affairs. Rafiki's flight during Scar's reign now also makes sense. It was not an act of cowardice, it was a strategic retreat. Rafiki understood that open confrontation with Sher and the forces behind him would be suicidal. Instead, he chose the path of quiet resistance, performing his rituals far from Sher's eyes, preparing the ground for the return of the true king. The colors Rafiki uses in his rituals also have deep symbolic meaning. In many African traditions, red is associated with life force and protection from evil spirits. Yellow is associated with royal power and the blessing of ancestors. When Rafiki paints the mark on Simba's forehead before his return to the Pride, he literally applies a protective symbol, the last barrier against the influence of dark force. But the most striking thing is that Rafiki may not have been the only one who knew about Scar's deal. There are subtle hints that Mufasa also suspected his brother's dark connections. Notice his wariness in scenes with Scar, how he never turns his back on him. This isn't just physical caution. It's an instinctive sense of spiritual danger. Moreover, the lessons Mufasa teaches Simba about the circle of life take on new meaning. This is not just an ecological lesson. It is an attempt to reinforce in his heir's mind an understanding of the natural order of things, the very order that Scar sought to destroy with his deal with the spirits. But the most significant revelation is that the struggle between the forces summoned by Rafiki and the spirits behind Scar continued even after the apparent conclusion of the story. The consequences of this spiritual war continued to affect the lands of the Pride for a long time. The discovery of the mystical nature of the conflict between Scar and the rightful rulers of the Pride completely overturns our understanding of the entire story of The Lion King. What seemed like a simple struggle for power is revealed to be a massive confrontation between two spiritual principles: the natural order embodied in the circle of life, and the chaos of the upside-down world brought about by Scar's deal with the dark spirits of the consequences of this deal extended far beyond what could have been imagined. Even after Scar's fall, when the wall of fire cut him off from returning, the lands of the Pride continued to bear the mark of this mystical conflict. Notice how quickly nature recovered after Simba's return. Such a sudden revival is impossible from an ecological point of view, but it makes perfect sense in the context of the spiritual liberation of the territory from dark influences. However, the most profound consequences manifested themselves in the following generations. Consider the character of Kiara, Simba's daughter, her rebelliousness, her desire to go beyond boundaries. This is not just teenage rebellion. These are echoes of the spiritual struggle that took place even before she was born. The territory once touched by the spirits of chaos retains their mark even after generations. Kovu's story is even more telling. Why did Scar choose him as his heir, even though he was not his biological descendant? In light of our theory, the answer becomes obvious. Scar was not looking for a genetic heir, but a spiritual successor, a vessel to continue his deal with the dark forces. The mark on Kovu's eye is not an accident or a coincidence. It is a symbol of spiritual succession, similar to Scar's own Scar. But the most shocking confirmation of our theory is the phenomenon of Scar's return to the Lion Guard. His appearance as a fiery spirit is not just a metaphor or a hallucination. It is a literal manifestation of his spiritual essence, the part of his soul that was given to the spirits of the savannah and remained in their power even after the disappearance of his physical body. Note how Scar's spirit is summoned. It requires a combination of volcanic fire and the roar of the elders. These are key elements in African spirit summoning rituals. Fire as a portal between worlds and sound as a conduit for spiritual power. Scar did not simply disappear. Part of his spiritual essence remained bound to the world of the living by the terms of his pact. Look at Simba's behavior after his coronation in the Pride Lands. His excessive caution, bordering on paranoia, especially towards the outsiders and the graveyard of the elephants, now takes on new meaning. This is not just trauma from past experiences. It is an intuitive understanding that the spiritual battle is not over, that traces of the Dark Pact are still present in the Pride's. Simba's reaction to any mention of Scar's name is particularly telling. It is not just dislike for the memory of a tyrant. It is a spiritual defense mechanism. In African traditions, uttering the name of the dead is considered a way to summon their spirit. By forbidding mention of Scar, Simba is intuitively trying to prevent his return, to close the channel. The spiritual legacy of Scar's deal is evident even in such a seemingly insignificant aspect as Simba's relationship with his daughter. His excessive protectiveness of Kiara, his desire to shield her from the outside world, is not just a father's instinct. It is an attempt to protect her from the still-present influence of the dark forces once summoned by Scar. The most philosophically significant consequence of Scar's pact with the spirits was a profound change in the very understanding of power in the Pride Lands. After Sher's reign, power ceased to be perceived as the natural right of the strongest. It came to be seen as a responsibility, a service to a higher order. Simba and his descendants rule not because they are stronger or smarter, but because they serve the circle of life, opposing chaos and destruction. The ritual of presenting the heir, which we see at the beginning of the first film and at the beginning of The Lion King 2, also takes on new meaning. It is not simply a demonstration of a new member of the royal family. It is a spiritual rite confirming the ruler's connection to the natural order, to the good spirits of the savannah, and his opposition to the. But the deepest philosophical lesson of the story of Scar and his pact with the spirits is the understanding of the true price of power. Scar, in his quest to obtain the throne at any cost, did not simply betray his brother, he betrayed the very essence of royal power, which in African tradition has always been perceived as a sacred service, as maintaining harmony between the world of the living and the world of spirits. In the final scenes of The Lion King, when we see the Pride's lands restored, we witness more than just ecological restoration. We see the spiritual cleansing of the territory. the return of balance between the material and spiritual worlds, the restoration of the true order of things after the temporary. But the most troubling question remains. Has Scar's deal with the dark spirits of the savannah been completely broken? The events of the Lion Guard show that traces of this deal are still present in the Pride Lands, that the spiritual battle continues even generations later. Perhaps the terms of the agreement were meant to last longer than Scar's physical life. An even more disturbing question is whether Scar was the first to make such a deal. Judging by some hints in the expanded universe of The Lion King, similar agreements with the dark spirits of the savannah may have been made before. Perhaps this cyclical spiritual battle is an integral part of the history of the Pride Lands, a constant struggle between. The most intriguing question remains the role of Kion, Simba's son and holder of the Roar of the Elders, in this ongoing spiritual conflict. His ability to communicate with the spirits of his ancestors and manifest their power through his roar is a continuation of the spiritual lineage of defenders of the natural order, opposing the dark forces once summoned by Scar. In conclusion, it is worth considering. What if Scar's story is not just a fairy tale about an evil uncle who seized the throne? What if it is a profound mythological tale about the eternal spiritual struggle, the price of power, and the consequences of disrupting the natural order? A story rooted in the ancient spiritual traditions of Africa, in the understanding of the world as a balance between the material and the spiritual, between order and chaos? In this context, Scar appears before us not as a one-dimensional villain, but as a tragic figure, a lion whose thirst for power led him to make a deal with forces far beyond his understanding. A lion who wanted to be king, but became merely a tool in the hands of ancient spirits seeking to disrupt the harmony of the universe. And perhaps the most important question we must ask ourselves after all this: has this spiritual battle ended? Or does it continue to this day, manifesting itself in new conflicts, in new trials faced by the lands of the Pride and their rulers? For if Scar's pact with the spirits truly existed, if this mystical connection still influences the world of the Lion King, then the story we know and love takes on a whole new, much deeper and more disturbing dimension.